Hello everybody, and welcome to a new series that I'm going to try to do every, month or so? Maybe bi-monthly? I don't know. I watch a lot of movies. Well, at least recently I've been watching a lot of movies. Ever since last year, I've been trying to watch at least one movie a day. Because I just like watching movies and just expanding my knowledge on film in general. Because unlike some of my friends, I don't know that much about film. And I know I definitely haven't seen as many movies as them. And over the past year or so, I've been adding stuff to my Netflix queue. And it's pretty enormous. I have over 400 things added to it. I'm not sure if I'll actually watch them all, but I can try. I added some things that I questioned to myself why I even added it. But since my queue is so large and I watch so many movies a month, I thought it'd be interesting to make a little series where I talk about the movies I've been watching for the past couple weeks or so. Like I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to make this monthly or bi-monthly. We'll just see where it goes. I'll talk about the movies one by one. I'll probably spend less than a minute on each movie, because this isn't like the review or somethings where I do more than a minute. Usually they're about like 3 minutes or less. But for this, it's going to be a bit more rambly. I'm not going to really have any notes. I mean, I have a couple of things I've written down, but they're like very vague. And all of the movies on the list are things I watched on Netflix. Some of them aren't available anymore because they purged stuff at the beginning of the month, but those movies will probably reappear on Netflix at some point. They have this weird habit of having movies disappear one month and then appearing another month later. Like, did their license run out for just a couple months? I don't know. Anyway, let's get started with the first movie that I watched on the queue this episode, and that was Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I remember seeing clips of this movie in a hospital somewhere when I was little, and really all I know about it is that Tim Burton directed it. I believe it's one of his first films, and honestly, I thought there was a show before the movie came out. I didn't know it was the other way around, but honestly, the humor in this movie just really isn't my thing. I don't know what it is, it's just really bland to me. The only thing I really found funny was the Alamo joke. I mean, maybe this type of humor worked in the 80s, but 30 years later, I don't see the appeal. Next up is Super. I told you I was going to spend under a minute on each movie. Super is like Kick-Ass, and it actually came out the same year as Kick-Ass. I was surprised to find out this was actually directed by James Gunn, the same guy that did Guardians of the Galaxy. And it stars Dwight from The Office, and I like this movie, but I've heard so many people say that it's so much better than Kick-Ass. But to be honest, I like Kick-Ass better, though I haven't seen Kick-Ass in a while, so I don't know. And to be honest, I can't tell if this is more violent or less violent than Kick-Ass, because there are some pretty gory scenes in this. Then I watched Little Witch Academia, or Academy, I guess? They actually had both the short and the, extended short, I guess, called The Enchanted Parade. Though I guess that's not accurate because The Enchanted Parade is its own thing, it's not an extended short. Like, they're completely different stories. And this is from Studio Trigger, I believe, and they did Kill la Kill. I actually saw the original Little Witch Academy shorts before I even saw Kill la Kill. And I know there was an Indiegogo for it, or for the new one, I guess. But it looks beautiful, it has very vibrant animation. And it has some great character designs. I love the witch named Susie. I really wish they would make this a series though, because the characters are great. Next up is National Treasure. I remember seeing a little bit of this on TV. I think it was actually the end of it that I was watching. I just knew that the film was about treasure hunting, and you got Nicolas Cage in it, and a lot of American history. I'm not sure how much of it is actually accurate. I mean, of course the treasure is made up, but I mean like the other facts that are thrown around in the film. I really didn't think it was anything that special. Then there's Battle Royale. This is a Japanese film, and it's pretty much a Japanese Hunger Games. Though I've never actually seen Hunger Games, so I can't really compare it. But from what I understand about the Hunger Games, this is pretty much what the Hunger Games is. You have a bunch of these teenagers on an island trying to kill each other. And the dialogue and the characters in this felt very anime-like, which I guess makes sense because it is a Japanese film. And I know this is going to sound racist, but it was hard to tell characters apart because of the school uniforms. There were only 2 other teenagers that were a part of it that dressed differently, because apparently they were survivors before. But other than that, I think this movie is really awesome. As soon as the first death happens, it's a thrill ride until the end. Next is 101 Dalmatians, the 1996 one. This is a needless live-action remake. And apparently they're remaking it again. And this film is really weird because the guy who owns Pongo is a game designer instead of a musician? I mean, I know there are game developers that are only one person, but I don't think that was a common thing in the 90s. Also, Glenn Close in this movie is so hammy as Cruella de Vil. She's pretty much the best part of the movie just because of how hammy she is. Also, Hugh Laurie is in this. Fucking House is in 101 Dalmatians. Other than that, I was kind of impressed by the animal stunts in it. Those are some pretty well-trained animals, though there is some puppetry in it, I guess. Then we have what is probably my favorite out of this list, Blue Ruin. This is a fantastic film. It's a revenge story, but told in a way where there's very little dialogue. It has some excellent cinematography, some tense, intimate moments, and it gives you just enough information to know what's going on. It doesn't bog itself down with exposition. I had a really great time watching it, and I highly recommend it, especially if you like movies that rely more on visual storytelling. This next one's a weird one. It's called Love from 2011. I have to specify the year because there's a surprising amount of movies that are just named Love. And when I started watching this, I thought Netflix screwed up. Because in the beginning of it, the Civil War is going on, but really it's about this guy in the International Space Station who's alone. And I thought there was always more than one person in the ISS. Though this movie takes place in the future, so maybe they changed it. This movie is some weird combination between Moon, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and some kind of documentary because it cuts to these interviews every so often, which is really weird. It's trying to say something about human connection, but the message seems so heavy-handed, but I feel like the movie is trying to be subtle, yet failing miserably. I know there are some people that liked this movie, but to me it just came off as trying too hard. Next up is American Pie. I remember seeing bits of this on cable, like on Comedy Central or something. It's a movie about getting laid, and it has the most late 90s soundtrack ever. I can't really dislike the movie too much because it has Bare Naked Ladies in the soundtrack, and I love that band. One thing that bothers me about this movie is that they're high schoolers, but they look more like they're in their 20s, though they are seniors, so I guess they have leeway there. I also watched American Wedding, which isn't American Pie 2? I didn't know that. Apparently American Wedding is the third, but they didn't have the second American Pie available on Netflix for whatever reason. Both American Pie and American Wedding are gone now, though. These movies pretty much rely on gross out and sex humor, which can sometimes work and sometimes doesn't. I don't really hate these movies, but I don't really love them either. I'm just sort of indifferent to them. But speaking about sex, the next movie I watched was Blue is the Warmest Color. It's about a girl realizing she's a lesbian, then getting with a girl, having a relationship, and going through all the hurdles of that, and ends on one of the most intense breakup scenes I've ever seen. By the way, this movie has a lot of explicit sex scenes. Like, they go all the way. By the way, this movie is French. One thing that bothered me about it though is that there's too many close-up shots. Especially of people eating and smoking, it's really weird, it put me off. And the main character has this Kristen Stewart Twilight look to her. I'm not sure if that's just me, but maybe you can see it. Overall, I thought it was pretty good though. Next up is Masters of the Universe, which is based on the He-Man cartoon. I don't know much about He-Man, but I gotta say, this movie is one of the most generic 80s fantasy films I've ever seen. Especially the music, it just has this very generic sound to it. And it's weird that they have He-Man and the characters sent to Earth in modern day, or I guess the 80s. And the device that sent them there is mistaken for a synthesizer? It's a really odd movie. But I know my friend Jim has this movie as a guilty pleasure, and I can definitely see it as being one of those. Next up is Wings, not the TV show. This is a silent movie. I've watched a few silent movies, mainly comedies like Keaton and Chaplin, and a couple of horror ones, and also a sci-fi one with Metropolis, but I've watched very few drama silent movies. And this film is about World War I and the fighter pilots during that time, and it actually has some very impressive camera work and effects for the time. This was actually the very first movie to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Well, it was either this or Sunrise. I can't recall what I read, I'll ask Jim. Then I watched Hitch. This is about Will Smith being a secret love doctor, and it also stars Kevin James, with, of course, a lot of fat guy slapstick. It's a romantic comedy, there's some misunderstandings. It's really not that interesting. That's really all I have to say about it. Then finally, the last movie on this Q list thing, The Monster Squad. This is an 80s kid adventure movie, and it stars the Universal monsters, like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Wolfman. And it's an incredibly cheesy movie, but it's really fun. It's probably the most 80s adventure movie ever. And by that, I mean it feels 80s. Like there's no other decade this could have come from. I know this movie is a bit of a cult hit, and I can definitely see why. So those are the movies for this episode of my Netflix queue thing of whatever I'm going to call it. I was thinking of Down the Netflix Queue or something. I just thought it'd be fun to share with you what I've been watching. And if you enjoyed this, tell me in the comments. I'll probably be doing a couple more of these just to see if I want to make this a series or not. And if you've seen any of the movies that I mentioned, tell me what you thought of them, and tell me which one's your favorite. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, by now we're getting a bit used to winter. We're like soldiers in the middle of a campaign.